Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is my partner in everything therapeutic, Ken. How you doing, Ken?
I am exceptionally well. This is episode 102 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and it is a great episode that we have today. I've been looking over the topics, Rory, and these are all heavy hitters, I believe. We're going to be starting off speaking about how you explain your modality, the modality that you practice to a client, or whether you should, in fact, explain your modality to a client. That's what we're going to be starting off with. Then practice matters today, Rory. You're going to be dipping your toe into something that I believe is covered very shallowly when we do our counselling training, and that is endings in counselling, or as you put it, the art of the ending in counselling.
Yes, I'm going to be talking about how you end a session, and I've just delivered a lecture in the counselling study resource on the use of structuring counselling skills. And this is just a little taster, a little song of that lecture. I'm going to be talking about how to end a counselling skills session and some of the things that might come up. And of course, I've got a super duper handout, Ken, to help people, a bit of a checklist to help people develop that art, and it is an art, of ending a session.
Well, you're going to want to stay tuned for that one. And we're going to be ending episode 102, asking the question, what do we do when a client directly looks us in the eyes and asks us, what should I do? Or they ask us for some advice. So that's episode 102, but let's start it off explaining your modality to a client. My question, Rory, should we even be explaining our modality to a client?
Well, it depends on which modality you're practicing. I was having a bit of a think about that. And there are some modalities of therapy, meta models, where explaining the meta model to the client or the model of therapy and how it works is essential. And I'm going to pick two out of the air. The first one is cognitive behavioural therapy, because a CBT therapist would explain to a client that in that model of therapy, the belief is that human disturbance or the way people feel is generated maybe by faulty thinking, and the therapist will teach, and this is the critical thing, the client how to think differently, how to restructure their thoughts, and that's usually done by homework. So in CBT, absolutely, there is a model of therapy there that needs to be taught, and that's why we call it active directive. In other words, the therapist and the client are active in that therapy. And the other model I can think of is transactional analysis. I was talking to my good friend Bob Cook, and Bob Cook told me that Eric Berne, who invented TA, it was basically a cognitive model right at the beginning, where Eric Berne would write on the board parent, adult, and child, and say to the client, which ego state are you in? And modern TA therapists, well, maybe not running to the board 3 or 4 times, would teach the model. They would say parent, adult, and child. The interesting question is, would we share with a client what person's sense of therapy was? Would we say about interjected values and conditions of worth? And my view would be we possibly wouldn't. I introduce myself as a person-centered therapist, and I would just explain it as I'm here to give you the space to be able to speak about what's going on for you, and maybe we can make sense of that together.
Yeah, I think maybe I threw a red herring in the beginning there, Rory. Would you even speak to tell someone what your modality is? I put that in on purpose because, of course, you're going to mention what your modality is, because part of our contracting in our first session is outlining our store, laying it out, telling the person what is on offer, and importantly, what is not on offer. So if a person comes in, we think of frame of reference. A person coming in for counselling would probably not have gone to college and done a counselling course and understand all the different modalities and what they entail and what they're all about and what modalities are a best fit for what kind of a presentation. That is information that we, as the student, as the practitioner, have in our head. So the client possibly will come in with a frame of reference based on what experience they've had. That might have been from watching the television. That may have been from a friend that has spoken about counselling that they may have gone through, or it may be from them themselves going to a certain modality of counselling, and they might bring that in. So I think it's really important in that contracting phase to ask the client if they've been in therapy before, and to outline what it is that is on offer and what is not on offer. If they, for instance, came in and they were expecting you to work in the same way as their previous therapist by giving them homework and working in a cognitive behavioral way, and you were offering person-centered therapy, then I think it would be respectful that the client know that, but not necessarily the workings of the modality.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think you've hit that red herring that you threw. I'm covered in fish here. Is that we may ask a client right at the beginning what their experience of therapy is. That's really good assessment. And if they've had a CBT, and it's more likely they've had CBT, you could ask them how they experienced it, and then you can say, well, unlike CBT, I won't be setting your homework, or I won't be asking you to think about irrational thinking, and just explain it in that way. But we wouldn't go, I think person-centered therapists wouldn't go into that detail of, well, you might have had an introjected value or a condition of worth, and we're helping you with your organismic self. I think basically because it takes students a long time to understand what that means, and I think clients may go away kind of very confused. But you're absolutely right. What it isn't and what it is, super important.
And as you're saying that, let's jump into person-centered therapy for a moment here. That is not a taught model, so there is no need to teach the model to the client in order for them to be able to benefit from that. And I'm contrasting that to what you mentioned, Rory, of transactional analysis, where you are going to teach the model. It's imperative that they understand the model to be able to benefit from the therapy. But it can be really tempting as a person-centered therapist to want to share what an introjected value is when you see a client bringing that into the therapy room. When a client is speaking and you recognize a condition of worth, it can be tempting to be lured in to explain, what you're experiencing there is. And what we're doing there is we're taking the person away from the feelings and putting them in their head, because it's in our head that we process the theory, and it's not important. And Carl Rogers outlines it is not important for us to share the theory in person-centered therapy, merely to be with the client. And of course we can explain that, and we do maybe explain that in our initial session with them, where we say, well, what is on offer here from me is person-centered therapy. And what that basically means is that I go with you wherever you go. You lead these sessions. I'm not going to tell you what to do, where to go, because nobody knows your life and what you're bringing better than you do. But I will go with you. No matter how scary it gets, I'll be there with you. How does that sound to you? And then kind of feel that out with the client. Because the other side of this, Rory, is that very often when a client is coming into therapy, they're bringing their material, and that's what's most important to them. Not what you studied and what you know and what you understand as a therapist. They're more likely to want to get into their material and start bringing where they're at.
Absolutely, Ken. And there was some massive research done by someone called John Norcross about 10 years ago now. And the research wasn't just a few people, it wasn't 50, it was thousands of client interviews. And they came to the conclusion that the quality of the relationship was the biggest factor in outcomes, positive outcomes for clients. And in fact, it was such a powerful piece of research that our friends in the TA community developed a development of TA, and it was called the relational turn.
Oh, I like that.
It was relational turn, and Hagendown and Sills, Charlotte Sills, and they developed a relational model based, not exclusively, but certainly drew from the work of Carl Rogers. So, it's a known kind of fact in therapy that the quality of the relationship is probably the best indicator of a good outcome for clients.
Yeah, definitely. And just thinking of explaining the modality and again just linking into person. Then I just had a thought run through my head. Can you imagine the nightmare of explaining the 19 propositions? Oh my goodness me! I mean, I taught counselling for some time, and I still have to read over them very, very carefully when referring to the 19 propositions. But there you go. And I think that it's just your head, Rory, when we do these podcast amazes me so often. I think of Sherlock Holmes. He had his mind palace, and it's because I get to see you, our listeners. You don't get to see Roy. I get to see. And when he's quoting from books and saying authors and all that kind of stuff, it's all coming from his mind palace, from his head. Because I can see you're not referring to notes there, Rory. It's absolutely incredible. But what I like is that you've kind of really, very neatly linked this first topic, explaining your modality to the client, to topic number 3, when clients ask for advice. It's clever how that kind of goes together, because of course in person-centered theory we wouldn't be giving advice, but we're going to get onto that in a moment. But first we need to look at the endings of sessions, and I'm kind of mindful that every single session we have has an ending to it. We have an ending to a session, and we also have endings to a group of sessions, whether they are planned or unplanned. Yet when we go to college, university, and we learn about this, we spend very little time on endings, little time on something that is practically in every session we do, Rory.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be talking about how to end maybe a single session. So unlike, the content or the discussions we've had before, Ken, about endings or ending a series of sessions, this is specifically about ending a session, what to think about, how to time it, how to pace it, and also the what I like to call the confounding variables, the things that clients may say that may delay ending of a session, and how to work with that. So stay tuned.
Looking forward to that. That's Practice Matters with Rory, and we're going to pick that up after this very short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
The art of closing a counselling skills session. One of the trickier elements of managing the therapeutic hour is that of ending the session on time. The art of this is to understand that endings start at the beginning of the therapeutic hour. Let me explain. By mentioning how long the session goes on for right at the beginning, you are signalling to the client how much time is available and who manages the time boundary, which of course is you. Stating at the beginning of the session, we have around 50 minutes and our reminders around 5 minutes from the end so that we can finish on time, is useful for 2 reasons. First, it highlights to the client how much time they have, and secondly, it puts an emphasis that it is the therapist, not themselves, who manages the time, allowing the client to focus on self. The most appropriate skill to use at the end of a therapeutic hour is summarising, as it validates what the client has said and gives a clear indication that the session is coming to an end. So what pitfalls can a therapist encounter when ending a session? Well, the first is self-generated, a rookie mistake, meaning that some students find themselves right at the end of the session asking, "So is there anything else you want to look at?" With 5 minutes remaining, the client opens up about another issue, only for the therapist to say, okay, we don't have any time left. Could we discuss that next week? Or extending the session for another 10 to 15 minutes, at which point the time boundaries evaporate, giving the client the impression that time boundaries are really non-existent. The very worst scenario is that an abrupt ending may leave the client confused or even feeling discounted. Not good. The second pitfall is that of being doorknobbed. This phenomenon occurs when a client walks towards the door and makes a bombshell disclosure. The way to work with this is to first ascertain risk. If a client discloses that they may harm themselves or others, then you need to know what the procedures your placement has and how to enact them. If your client's disclosure is around new material, the respectful way of working with this would be to say, "I hear you have something else you wish to explore. Perhaps we could look at it in the next session." This response respectfully acknowledges the client while simultaneously manages the time boundaries. The art of managing time is about preparation, as well as replacing the battery in the therapy room clock from time to time.
Thank you as always, Rory. And if you want to get Rory's super duper handout from today's episode 102, all you need to do is go to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. There's 2 L's in counselling. We're based in the United Kingdom. Counsellingtutor.com. Top tab, click on podcasts, and just scroll down to episode 102. All of the notes of today's episodes are there, including any links that we may have mentioned or thought of when we were kind of putting the notes together. And from that very page, you can download for free of charge, Rory's super duper handout on ending a counselling session. And of course, if you are a member of our paid for service, which is called the Counselling Study Resource, Rory and I put out so much free stuff, including this podcast, but we also have a more robust paid for service called Counselling Study Resource. And if you are a member of that, well, that handout has already been added to the handouts vault in the Counselling Study Resource. So if you're wondering what Counselling Study Resource is and how you can benefit from that, well, you can hear more of that at the end of today's episode. But we're moving on from ending a counselling session into when a client asks for advice. What should I do, Rory?
Oh, I'd give advice. I'd say, you know what I'd do in your situation? I would do this. And I read a wonderful passage. I can't remember where it is, but I'm minded that it may have been with our friends at the BACP on their website about advice giving. And it said something along the lines of, if clients wanted advice, they may as well just go down and speak with their neighbour.
Yeah.
And you know, it'd be just as useful possibly as getting advice, because advice is kind of our own experience. It's kind of recycled, isn't it?
Yeah.
So sometimes, you know, it's like giving your own experience, your own frame of reference, packing it up in a nice parcel and handing it to someone. And, you know, while it might be useful, sometimes it might be like getting a pair of red socks at Christmas. You think, oh, well, that's very nice, but I don't really like red socks.
Yep.
I don't wear them. So if someone asks for advice, I think to be clear, I think to be really congruent and say, well, I can't give you advice because that would be my own experience and that might not be yours. You can do a little kind of interesting exercise. What I sometimes say, and I certainly did this with younger clients, would say, if you had a friend who was going through the same difficulties you were having, what would you say to your friend? And that question is a really interesting one, because it's amazing how many people find their own solutions just answering a friend's question about what they're going through.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like reframing. It's like coming out of yourself, and it's no longer about you. So you're not carrying the weight of that emotion. What would you say to someone else? Reframing that whole situation. Like that, Rory. Thank you. Yeah.
And sometimes clients say, well, I don't know. And that's a great starting point in therapy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. This is. I remember level 2, going to level 2. So my introduction to counselling concepts. I thought, this is something I'd like to study. I'd love to get out there and help people. And I remember pretty much near the beginning, information given to me, counsellors do not give advice. And I was a bit distraught. I thought, well, what am I going to go and study for the next 4 years if I'm not going to be giving anybody advice? And it's interesting because it's so tempting. It's human behaviour to give advice. That people will come to us and I'm going through this and I'm going to, oh, have you tried this? And what about that? And maybe you should do this. And this is what we hear all the time around us when we bring our situations, good or bad. People will be telling us what we could have and should have and should do within those situations. So we're bombarded by advice. And counselling, the skill in not giving advice takes practice and it takes restraint. Certainly in the beginning, I remember first simulated sessions itching to give a bit of, oh, have you tried? And did you ask them this? And why don't you try that? But I guess the training is to train yourself out of acting on that impulse and rather being there and facilitating the client's journey of finding those solutions. Because the thing with advice is, as you said, Rory, it's recycled experience coming from the advice giver that was taken, dusted off and handed over as something shiny and new. But so often, if you think to your own life, when somebody has given you advice, even when that advice sounds like the right thing to do you take it? It's somebody else's idea that they're giving you. And the theory suggests that if we're given it kind of doesn't fit because it's somebody else's. But if we find that same solution ourselves, then it's I've heard that so many times before. This has been right in front of my nose so many times before, but now the light has gone on. Now I finally understand that. And we don't get that from somebody else telling us. We only get that from finding it ourselves. And we give that gift to our clients by not giving them advice and helping them as they find their own way.
Absolutely, Ken. And of course, advice is wrapped up with rescuing and sympathy, which are two other elements of counselling. We use empathy. We're about autonomy, about helping people. And I will give you a little observation from my years of teaching about what happens when people give advice. During level 2, I used to do a little exercise called "This is what I believe you have said." Very simple exercise. Someone writes down something that's very important to them. They speak to the person who's doing the listening, and then the listener responds and says, "This is what I believe you said." And the idea is to reflect back. It's a very basic reflection exercise. And I was observing two students. One student said, I was driving along the other day and somebody, carved me up in the car, and there was honkings of horns, and I was getting angry, and they were stopped. And then the listener said, "Well, you need to take driving lessons.
Yeah. If
you took driving lessons, you'd be a better driver, and then you wouldn't have that difficulty." And he got into a little bit of a heated argument. "Don't you tell me how to drive." And before long, I had to step in like a referee and go, "Yeah, I'm not quite sure that you've got the idea of this." But that's what can happen. And with advice, of course, comes something that we never, ever do in the therapy room, and that's judgment.
Oh, that is heavy. Yeah, 100%. That has just gone clang as you said that, and rang. The clang was the ring of truth, Rory. Yeah, advice comes packed with frame of reference from the advice giver. It is and it can even be the advice giver's truth. I know that this works. I know that this is the right path. I've walked this same path in my own life. This is what you need to do. And it is truth for the person who is giving the advice. It is their truth. It is not the advice receivees. I don't know if these are the technical words, Rory. I'm making them up. The advice giver and receivee. Not the advice receivees. Truth. They need to find their own truth, and it may well be different. I worked in recovery services for drugs and alcohol for some years, and the one thing that is common is that each person's journey is different, and it is their own in how they find their recovery and how they sustain and maintain their recovery. You can't take, if you have recovery, your idea and give it to someone else. It doesn't work. They have to find their own. And the same is true in our therapy rooms. When somebody brings in their pain, when they bring in their suffering, when they bring in that they're struggling with in life, they need to find the way, and we are there to facilitate. And it is that facilitation that we learn, and that facilitation is nuanced. Nuance is kind of highs and lows, light and shade, where advice is just bam, here, take this that worked for me. I think this is a good idea.
Absolutely. And one of the most wonderful lessons I had in my training, one of the greatest openings of light, I was bathed in light of understanding, Ken, was when someone asked that to one of my tutors and said, "If a client said to you, what would you do in my situation?" She paused and thought, and she said, "I'd probably reply, anything I'd want to."
Oh, I like that. Because that does come up, and you're not going to have to be in practice for too long before you hear from a client, what should I do?
So what a great episode, Ken. We started off with explaining your modality, talking about should you explain your modality, and if you have a modality, it would depend on which it is. You'd explain some, and you might not explain others. I've talked about ending a session and the art of ending a session. And then finally, advice giving in the therapy room, how not to give advice and what to avoid. What a great episode. And I'll give someone a little piece of advice before I go. Stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.